The courtroom was dead silent. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning, the scratch of the stenographer's pen, and the pounding heart of Preston Sterling. He sat there, adjusting his $3,000 suit, a smirk playing on his lips. He had won. He was keeping the mansion, the cars, and the company. His wife, Audrey? She was leaving with nothing but the clothes on her back. Or so he thought. The judge cleared his throat, holding a single sealed envelope that had just been submitted into evidence. He looked at Preston, then at Audrey, and finally read the name on the document aloud. It wasn't Audrey Sterling. It wasn't even her maiden name. When that name echoed off the mahogany walls, Preston's smirk didn't just fade, it shattered. Because in that split second, he realized he hadn't just lost the divorce. He had just declared war on the only person who actually owned him. Preston Sterling was the kind of man who didn't just enter a room, he annexed it. Standing 6'2" with the jawline of a movie star and the cold, shark-like eyes of a private equity raider, he was the embodiment of American excess. At 42, he was the CEO of Sterling Dynamics, a logistics and shipping empire that moved everything from microchips to military-grade steel across the Atlantic. He was new money, but he wore it like old armor. He was loud, he was aggressive, and he was undeniably powerful. And he treated his wife, Audrey, like his favorite acquisition. They had met 5 years ago in a coffee shop in downtown Chicago. It was a cliché, really. He was the tycoon barking orders into a cell phone. She was the quiet, understated brunette reading a paperback in the corner, nursing a latte she had made last for 45 minutes. Audrey was beautiful, but not in the flashy, high-maintenance way Preston usually went for. She had a soft, almost fragile elegance. She was a kindergarten teacher, or so she said. She drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic. She wore off-the-rack cardigans. To Preston, she was the perfect blank canvas. A woman he could mold. A woman who would be grateful for his wealth, who would never challenge him, and who would look perfect on his arm at the Met Gala. He pursued her with the same relentless intensity he used to acquire failing competitors. Flowers, private jets, dinners at Le Bernardin. He overwhelmed her. And when she finally said yes, Preston felt a surge of triumph. He didn't just want a wife, he wanted an audience. He wanted someone to witness his greatness from the front row. 5 years later, the audience had stopped clapping. The marriage had disintegrated slowly, then all at once. It wasn't just the late nights or the business trips to Monaco that Preston took with his 24-year-old executive assistant, Jessica. It was the contempt. Preston had grown bored with Audrey's silence. He mistook her quiet demeanor for stupidity, her patience for weakness. He started berating her in front of the staff. He cut off her access to the joint accounts to teach her fiscal responsibility. He moved Jessica into a condo 3 blocks from their penthouse and didn't even bother to hide the receipts. When he finally served Audrey with the divorce papers, he did it over breakfast on a Tuesday, between bites of his egg white omelette. "It's not working, Audrey," he said, not even looking up from his tablet. "I need someone with more drive. Someone who fits the brand Sterling Dynamics is becoming. You'll be taken care of course. Within reason." He slid a thick envelope across the marble table. It was a settlement offer, a pittance, enough to buy a small condo in the suburbs and a used car, but nothing close to the life she had lived with him. It was an insult. Audrey didn't scream. She didn't throw her coffee in his face. She didn't cry. She just picked up the envelope, her face an unreadable mask of calm, and said, "I'll have my lawyer look at this." Preston laughed, a sharp, barking sound. "Your lawyer? Audrey, honey, you don't have a lawyer. You have a legal aid clinic number saved in your phone. Do yourself a favor. Sign it. If you fight me, I will bury you." I have teams of attorneys who cost more per hour than you used to make in a year. Don't embarrass yourself." He stood up, buttoned his jacket, and walked out of the penthouse, feeling lighter than air. He had already mentally moved on. He was thinking about the merger with the Dutch shipping giant, Van der Hoven, and the celebratory weekend he promised Jessica in St. Bart's. He had no idea that the woman sitting at his breakfast table wasn't looking at the settlement offer. She was looking at his back, and for the first time in 5 years, her eyes weren't soft. They were steel. Audrey waited until the elevator doors dinged shut. Then she stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the sprawling skyline of the city Preston thought he owned. She pulled a burner phone from her pocket, a cheap plastic thing she had bought with cash 2 days ago. She dialed a number from memory. It rang once. "It's done," she said, her voice dropping an octave, shedding the timid kindergarten teacher persona like a heavy coat. He served the papers. "Initiate Protocol 7. A deep, gravelly voice on the other end answered. "Are you sure, ma'am? Once we start this, there is no going back. We will strip him to the bone." "He wanted a war, Arthur," Audrey whispered, pressing her hand against the cold glass. "He thinks he's fighting a sheep. Let's show him the wolf." The weeks leading up to the first hearing were a masterclass in psychological warfare, executed entirely by Preston. Or so he believed. He hired the most aggressive divorce attorney in the state, a man named Garrett Sterling. No relation, but Preston liked the synergy. Garrett was a pit bull in a suit, known for making opposing spouses cry during depositions. Their strategy was simple: starve and crush. They froze the credit cards Audrey had access to. They put a hold on the country club membership. Preston even had the audacity to change the locks on the vacation home in the Hamptons, while Audrey was still technically listed as a co-owner. He wanted her desperate. He wanted her to come crawling back, begging for that settlement check so she could afford rent. But Audrey didn't crawl. In fact, she effectively vanished. She moved out of the penthouse the same day he served the papers, taking only her personal items. No jewelry, no furs, no designer bags. Just her books and her clothes. She moved into a nondescript luxury hotel downtown, the Ritz-Carlton, Preston noted with a frown when he saw the address on the legal correspondence. "Who's paying for the Ritz?" Preston asked Garrett during a strategy lunch at the Ivy. "She has no income. I cut her off." Garrett shrugged, slicing into his steak. "Probably maxing out some emergency card you didn't know about. Or maybe she found a sugar daddy. Doesn't matter. It'll run out. The important thing is the prenup." Ah, the prenup. Preston's pride and joy. Before they married, Preston had forced Audrey to sign a prenuptial agreement that was thicker than a phone book. It stated that any assets acquired before the marriage remained sole property. It stated that any growth of business assets during the marriage was exempt from division. It capped alimony at a fixed, humiliatingly low rate, and only for a duration equal to half the length of the marriage. "It's bulletproof, Preston," Garrett assured him, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin. "I wrote it myself. She waived her right to discovery of your offshore accounts in the appendix. She waived spousal support if she contests the agreement. We have her in a corner. If she fights, she gets 0. If she signs, she gets crumbs. It's a win-win for you." But then the response came. It arrived not via a standard courier, but by a private security detail. A heavy black box was delivered to Garrett's office. Inside was a single document, the response to petition for dissolution of marriage. And the name of the law firm representing Audrey wasn't a legal aid clinic. It was Blackwood, Kingsman and Associates. When Garrett saw the letterhead, he actually choked on his coffee. Preston, sitting across from him, frowned. "What? Who are they? Some ambulance chasers?" Garrett looked pale. "No, Preston. They aren't ambulance chasers. They're the fixers. They represent the British royal family's private interests. They handle the Vatican's real estate disputes. They don't do divorces. They don't do domestic court in Chicago. Well, they're doing this one, Preston snapped, grabbing the paper. What does it say? Are they asking for half? Garrett read through the document, his brow furrowing deeper with every line. This is strange. They aren't contesting the prenup. Preston blinked. They aren't? No, Garrett said, confused. They are agreeing to the validity of the prenuptial agreement. In fact, they are enforcing it. They want an immediate summary judgment to uphold every single clause of the prenup you wrote. Preston leaned back, a smug grin spreading across his face. See, I told you she was weak. She knows she can't beat me. She's folding. She wants to get it over with. I don't know, Preston, Garrett murmured, rereading the page. Blackwood and Kingsman don't take cases to surrender. There's something here we're missing. Why would they want to enforce a prenup that leaves their client with nothing? Maybe because they know I'll destroy them if they don't, Preston gloated. Set the court date. I want this done by the end of the month. I have a wedding to plan with Jessica. The date was set, October 14th. Preston spent the next week liquidating some assets, just to be safe, moving money into shell companies in the Caymans. He wasn't technically supposed to move assets during a divorce, but he had done it a dozen times before. He knew the system. He knew that by the time the court auditors found the trail, he'd be divorced, and the money would be buried under 3 layers of corporate anonymity. He felt untouchable. He attended charity galas with Jessica on his arm, introducing her as his fiancée before the ink was even dry on the divorce papers. He gave interviews to Forbes, boasting about Sterling Dynamics' record profits. He was the king of Chicago, but he should have noticed the signs. The first sign was the bank loan. Preston called his personal banker at J.P. Morgan to authorize a bridge loan for the Vanderhoven merger. It was a routine $50 million line of credit he had used for years. "I'm sorry, Mr. Sterling," the banker said, his voice trembling slightly. The loan committee declined the request. Declined! Preston roared into his phone, pacing his office. "I have $1 billion in assets. I've been a client for 15 years. Who declined it?" It came from above the committee, sir. From the Risk Assessment Board. They cited instability in ownership structure. Instability? I own 100% of the voting shares. Preston smashed the phone down. The second sign was the suppliers. 2 of his biggest shipping partners in China suddenly pulled out of their contracts, citing force majeure. When Preston tried to sue them, he found out they had already been acquired by a holding company he had never heard of, Apex Meridian Group. The third sign was the silence. Audrey hadn't sent a single text. No angry voicemails. No pleas for money. It was as if she had ceased to exist. Preston ignored the signs. He was too focused on the victory lap. He walked into the courthouse on the day of the hearing, wearing a navy Brioni suit, flanked by Garrett and 2 junior associates. He looked like he was attending a board meeting, not a divorce. On the other side of the aisle, the doors opened. Audrey walked in. She wasn't wearing the cardigans anymore. She was wearing a tailored white suit that looked like it cost more than Preston's car. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, chic chignon. She wore dark sunglasses, which she removed slowly as she sat down. And next to her wasn't a local attorney. It was Arthur Kingsman himself. A man in his 60s, British, impeccably dressed, with a reputation for being the legal equivalent of a nuclear weapon. Preston leaned over to Garrett. "Why is Kingsman here? For a prenup dispute?" Garrett was sweating. I don't know, Preston, but I have a very bad feeling about this. The judge, a stern woman named Judge Halloway, banged her gavel. We are here for the matter of Sterling versus Sterling. I understand there is a motion to enforce the prenuptial agreement. Yes, Your Honor. Garrett stood up, his voice projecting confidence he didn't feel. My client, Mr. Sterling, seeks to enforce the document signed 5 years ago. We believe the terms are clear. Separate property remains separate. Arthur Kingsman stood up. He didn't project. He didn't shout. He spoke in a soft, clipped British accent that forced everyone in the room to lean in. We agree entirely, Your Honor, Kingsman said. My client, the respondent, insists that the prenuptial agreement be followed to the letter. Specifically, Clause 4, Section B. Any and all assets legally titled to a specific party prior to the marriage or acquired by that party's independent trusts during the marriage shall remain the sole property of that party, untouchable by the spouse. Preston smirked. Idiot, he thought. That clause protects me. Very well, Judge Halloway said. If both parties agree, this should be simple. Mr. Sterling keeps his assets. Mrs. Sterling keeps hers. Exactly, Preston whispered to Garrett. Easiest win of my life. However, Kingsman continued, pulling a single thick file from his leather briefcase. There is the matter of defining the assets. You see, Mr. Sterling seems to operate under the impression that he owns Sterling Dynamics. Preston stood up, ignoring his lawyer. I founded it. I built it. Of course I own it. Judge Halloway banged the gavel. Sit down, Mr. Sterling. Kingsman smiled, a cold, terrifying smile. Mr. Sterling founded the operating company, yes. But the capital? The initial $100 million injection 5 years ago that saved him from bankruptcy? That came from a venture capital firm called Archimedes Ventures. So what? Preston snapped. I paid them back. You paid back the interest, Kingsman corrected. But the equity clause, you didn't read the fine print of that loan, did you, Preston? In the event of a default, or a significant legal restructuring, such as a divorce where assets are contested, Archimedes Ventures has the right to convert their debt into controlling equity. Preston froze. I never defaulted. You violated the morality clause of the loan agreement when you moved in with your mistress, Kingsman said smoothly, which triggered the conversion yesterday. Preston felt the blood drain from his face. Who runs Archimedes Ventures? Kingsman turned to Audrey. Audrey didn't look at Preston. She looked at the judge. Your Honor, Kingsman said, Archimedes Ventures is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Sinclair Vanderbilt Trust, and the sole beneficiary of that trust is the woman sitting next to me. Preston's knees gave out. He sat down hard. No, he whispered. She's a teacher. She's nobody. Kingsman's voice cut through the air like a blade. She is a teacher because she enjoys children, Mr. Sterling. But she is not a nobody. You thought you married a girl named Audrey Miller. You didn't. You married Audrey Sinclair. Her mother was a Sinclair. Her father was the CEO of Global Oil. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. And, Kingsman added, delivering the final blow, since you insisted on enforcing the prenup that states all assets acquired by a party's independent trust remain sole property, you have just successfully argued that your wife owns your company, and you own nothing. The gavel bang didn't sound like a judgment. It sounded like a gunshot. Order! Order in this court! Judge Halloway's voice boomed, cutting through the murmurs that had erupted in the gallery. Preston sat frozen, his hands gripping the mahogany table so hard his knuckles turned white. His brain was misfiring, unable to process the data. Sinclair. The name bounced around his skull. Audrey Sinclair. The Sinclairs were American royalty. They were the kind of money that didn't appear on Forbes lists because they owned the magazines. They were oil, steel, and shipping, and he had made her split the check at their first dinner date. "Your Honor, this is preposterous," Garrett Sterling stammered. His earlier confidence dissolved into a puddle of sweat. This is fraud. She misrepresented herself. She signed legal documents under a false identity." Arthur Kingsman stood up, buttoning his suit jacket with a serene, almost bored expression. "Incorrect. She signed as Audrey Sterling. Before that, she was Audrey Miller, her mother's maiden name, which she legally adopted at the age of 18 to avoid parasites. Like your client." Kingsman turned his gaze to Preston. There was no fraud, just an omission of a pedigree you never bothered to ask about. Judge Halloway looked down at the paperwork. "Mr. Sterling, you petitioned to enforce the prenuptial agreement strictly. You argued that assets in independent trusts remain separate. Based on the evidence provided by Mr. Kingsman, the holding company Archimedes Ventures, which holds the controlling debt and equity of your firm, is an asset of Mrs. Sterling's trust. Therefore, under the very document you drafted, Sterling Dynamics is effectively hers." The judge signed the order. "Summary judgment granted. The division of assets is concluded in accordance with the prenuptial agreement. Court is adjourned." Preston leaped to his feet. "You can't do this. I built that company. I am the CEO." Audrey stood up. She didn't look at the judge. She didn't look at her lawyer. She turned slowly, deliberately, to face Preston. Up close, without the camouflage of her timid teacher persona, Preston saw the resemblance. The high cheekbones, the icy blue eyes. She looked exactly like her grandfather, the oil baron Silas Sinclair. "You were the CEO, Preston," Audrey said softly. Her voice wasn't angry. It was indifferent, which hurt worse. "The board of directors is meeting in 20 minutes. I'd check your email if I were you. You've been recalled." "Audrey, wait!" Preston scrambled, reaching for her arm. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a desperate, clawing panic. "Baby, listen, we can fix this. I didn't know. If you knew I was worth $3 billion, you would have treated me better?" Audrey finished for him, raising an eyebrow. "That's the problem, Preston. You didn't love me. You loved the idea of owning someone small, and now that you know I'm big, you don't love me. You just want to survive me." She pulled her arm away. "Goodbye, Preston." She walked out of the courtroom, flanked by Kingsman and 3 large security guards who looked like they ate specialized military rations for breakfast. Preston was left standing alone in the courtroom with Garrett. "Fix this," Preston hissed at his lawyer. Garrett began packing his briefcase with frantic speed. "Fix it. Preston, you just handed the keys to the castle to the enemy because you were too cheap to pay alimony. There is no fixing this. She owns the debt. She owns the equity. She owns you. I'll fire you." "You can't," Garrett said, snapping his case shut. "My retainer comes from the company account, and as of 5 minutes ago, you don't have access to the company account. I'm resigning as your counsel. Good luck." Garrett walked out, leaving Preston truly alone. But Preston Sterling was a fighter, or so he told himself. He wasn't going to let a piece of paper and a gotcha moment take his life away. He pulled out his phone. He had to get to the office. If he could get into the server room, he could delete the incriminating files, transfer the offshore cash, burn the place down if he had to. He ran out of the courthouse to where his driver, Carl, was waiting in the black Maybach. Preston ripped the back door open. "Office, now, drive like hell!" Carl didn't move. He was looking at his phone. He slowly turned his head. "Sorry, Mr. Sterling. I've just received a text from dispatch. The vehicle has been flagged for repossession." "Repossession?" I own the damn car." "Actually, sir," Carl said, showing him the screen. "The car is leased through Sterling Logistics Fleet Services. The lease has been terminated effective immediately by the new management." "Get out!" Preston snarled, grabbing the driver by the shoulder. "I'll drive it myself." "I can't let you do that, sir," Carl said, his voice hardening. "The engine has been remotely disabled." Preston looked at the dashboard. The screens were black. The car was a 2-ton brick. He screamed, a primal, guttural sound of rage, and kicked the tire. He spun around, breathless, sweat stinging his eyes. He had to get to the office. He hailed a cab, a yellow, dirty thing that smelled of stale cigarettes. It was the first time in 10 years he hadn't been in a private car. The ride to the Sterling Dynamics Tower took 20 minutes. 20 minutes of Preston checking his bank apps. Chase Personal, access denied, account frozen. Amex Platinum, card cancelled. Cayman Holdings, system error, contact administrator. They were suffocating him. The cab pulled up to the glass and steel skyscraper that bore his name. Sterling was written in 10-foot chrome letters above the entrance. He threw a crumpled $100 bill he found in his pocket at the driver and sprinted for the revolving doors. He needed to get to the 40th floor. He needed to shred the documents regarding the illegal dumping in the Pacific. If Audrey found those, he wasn't just broke, he was going to prison. He hit the lobby running, heading straight for the executive elevators. "Mr. Sterling, stop!" It was Frank, the head of building security. Frank was a former linebacker Preston had hired personally. They talked football every Monday. Preston felt a surge of relief. "Frank, thank God. I need the elevator override key. The system is glitching." Frank stepped in front of the elevator bank. He wasn't smiling. 2 other guards, men Preston didn't recognize, stood behind him. "I can't let you go up, Preston," Frank said. He didn't say, "Mr. Sterling." He said, "Preston, excuse me." Preston drew himself up to his full height. "I am the CEO of this company. Get out of my way or you're fired." "You were fired 10 minutes ago, Preston," Frank said, his face impassive. "We got the memo from the new chairwoman of the board, Ms. Sinclair. Your clearance is revoked. Your biometric data has been wiped." "This is my building!" Preston shouted, causing the receptionists and visitors in the lobby to turn and stare. "I built this. You answer to me." "Not anymore," Frank said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a cardboard box, a standard brown banker's box. "Ms. Sinclair anticipated you might try to come back. She had your personal effects packed up. It's all here, the photo of you and the senator, your stress ball, your cologne." Frank shoved the box into Preston's chest. "You need to leave the premises immediately, or I'm authorized to use force to remove a trespasser." Preston stared at Frank. He looked at the young receptionist, a girl he had yelled at yesterday for bringing him the wrong water. She was hiding a smirk behind her hand. "You're making a mistake, Frank," Preston whispered, his voice trembling. "When I get back on top, and I will destroy you." "Go home, Preston," Frank said sadly. Preston turned around. Clutching the cardboard box like a shield, he walked back through the lobby. The click-clack of his expensive Italian loafers on the marble floor sounded lonely. He pushed through the revolving doors and stepped out onto the sidewalk. It started to rain. Preston stood in the rain for 5 minutes before he remembered Jessica. Jessica! Of course. A wave of relief washed over him, so powerful it nearly knocked him over. Jessica wasn't just his mistress. She was his fiancée, his partner in crime. She was the one who knew where the real money was. Months ago, when Preston first started sensing the market getting volatile, he had siphoned off about $4 million in cash and bearer bonds. He had given them to Jessica to put in a safety deposit box under her name at a private vault in Switzerland. It was his doomsday fund. 4 million wasn't a billion, but it was enough to start over. It was enough to flee to Brazil, buy a villa, and live like a king. He hailed another cab. He didn't have enough cash left for a long ride, so he had the driver drop him 2 blocks from the luxury condo he had bought for Jessica in the Gold Coast district. He ran the rest of the way, the cardboard box dissolving in the rain, his suit soaked through. He reached the building, the Astor, and punched in the code for the gate. Error. He tried again. Error. Damn it! He slammed his hand against the keypad. Audrey must have gotten to the building management. She was thorough. He had to give her that. He waited until a tenant walked out with a dog and slipped in through the closing gate. He took the elevator to the 22nd floor, his heart hammering against his ribs. He needed that key to the Swiss vault. He needed Jessica to pack her bags. They were leaving tonight. He reached door 22B and pounded on it. "Jessica, open up! It's me!" Silence. "Jess, it's an emergency. Audrey, she's insane. She took the company. We have to go. Open the damn door." The lock clicked. The door swung open, but it wasn't Jessica standing there. It was a mover, a burly guy in a blue jumpsuit taping up a crate. Behind him, the apartment looked like a war zone of bubble wrap and boxes. "Who are you?" Preston demanded, pushing past the man. "Where is she?" "Hey, buddy, watch it," the mover grunted. "Ladies in the bedroom." Preston stormed into the master bedroom. Jessica was there. She was standing by the walk-in closet, tossing designer dresses into a Louis Vuitton trunk. She looked up when Preston entered. She didn't look happy to see him. She looked annoyed. "Jessica," Preston breathed, rushing toward her. "Thank God, we have to leave. Now, Audrey is... She's a Sinclair. She owns everything. They froze my accounts. We need the key to the Zurich box. Where is it?" Jessica paused, holding a pair of Jimmy Choos. She looked at Preston, soaked, holding a soggy box of desk toys, hair plastered to his forehead. She looked at the desperation in his eyes. She dropped the shoes into the trunk and sighed. "There is no key, Preston." Preston froze. "What? What do you mean?" "I saw you put it in your purse." "I mean," Jessica said, her voice devoid of the sugary sweetness she usually used with him, "that I already went to Zurich. Last week." Preston blinked. You went to Zurich?" "I had a feeling," Jessica said, shrugging. "You were getting sloppy. And I did some digging on your wife. I didn't know she was a Sinclair, but I knew she wasn't poor. People who are actually poor don't wear vintage Patek Philippe watches that look like beat-up heirlooms. I saw her wearing one at the gala last year. I knew she was playing a long game." She zipped up the suitcase. "So, I took the liberty of securing my future." "Your future?" Preston stepped closer, his hands shaking. "That's my money, Jessica. That's $4 million of my money." "Technically," Jessica smirked, "it was bearer bonds and cash in a box under my name. Possession is 9/10 of the law, isn't that what you always say?" Preston lunged for her. He grabbed her by the wrists. "Give it to me. You ungrateful little—" "I wouldn't do that," a deep voice rumbled from the doorway. Preston spun around. Standing in the bedroom doorway was a man Preston recognized. It was Marcus Thorne, a rival shipping magnate, a man Preston had outbid and humiliated 2 years ago. Marcus was leaning against the doorframe, holding a glass of scotch. Preston's scotch. "Hello, Preston," Marcus smiled. "Rough day?" Preston looked from Marcus to Jessica. You're with him?" Jessica pulled her wrists free and smoothed her blouse. She walked over to Marcus and kissed him on the cheek. "Marcus has been very supportive. He offered me a position at his firm, and a much nicer apartment." "You backstabbing?" "Business is business, Preston," Marcus said, taking a sip of the scotch. "You taught us all that. You stole my best route in 2021. I stole your girl and your nest egg in 2025. Seems fair." Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out a phone. "By the way, I think the police are on their way up." "Something about a trespasser?" "Jessica called them when she saw you on the security camera." Preston stumbled back. The walls were closing in. He had no money, no company, no car, no mistress. And now, the police were coming. "Jessica," Preston pleaded, his voice cracking. "Please, I have nothing." Jessica looked at him one last time. Her eyes were cold, reflecting the same shark-like indifference Preston had worn for years. "You should have signed the first settlement offer she gave you, Preston," Jessica said. "You really should have." Sirens wailed in the distance, getting louder. Preston turned and ran. He bolted out of the apartment, past the confused movers, and down the stairwell. He couldn't take the elevator. The police would be coming up that way. He ran down 22 flights of stairs, his expensive shoes slipping on the concrete. He burst out into the alleyway behind the building, gasping for air, his lungs burning. He collapsed against a dumpster, sliding down until he was sitting in a puddle of dirty rainwater. He sat there for a long time, shivering. The king of Chicago, the man who moved mountains, sitting in the trash. His phone buzzed. It was the only thing he had left. He looked at the screen. It was a text message from an unknown number. He opened it. It was a photo. A photo of him, taken just seconds ago, sitting by the dumpster. Preston looked up, frantically scanning the rooftops and windows. A second text came through. "Not so fun when you're the one being watched, is it?" "Ah." Preston stared at the screen. Audrey. She was watching him. She wasn't just defeating him, she was hunting him. He typed back, his thumbs shaking. "What do you want?" The 3 dots appeared instantly. "I want you to understand. Meet me at the place where you thought you bought me, 8:00 p.m. Don't be late." The place where he thought he bought her, the coffee shop, the one where they met, the one where he had dazzled her with his wealth and convinced himself she was a simpleton he could possess. Preston looked at the time. It was 6:45 p.m. He stood up, wiping the grime from his suit. He had 1 hour and 15 minutes. He didn't know what she wanted. Maybe she wanted to gloat. Maybe she wanted to offer him a lifeline, a job, a small allowance, mercy. Despite everything, Preston's ego flared up, a tiny spark in the darkness. "She wants to see me," he thought. "She's still obsessed with me. Love and hate are 2 sides of the same coin. If I can just talk to her, charm her, remind her of the good times. I can turn this around." He smoothed his hair back. He was Preston Sterling. He could sell ice to an Eskimo. He could sell redemption to the woman he scorned. He began to walk toward downtown, the rain washing the dirt from his face, but unable to wash the delusion from his mind. He had no idea that the meeting at the coffee shop wasn't a negotiation. It was an execution. The coffee shop was called the Daily Roast. It was a small, brick-walled establishment tucked away on a side street, smelling of roasted beans and old paper. 5 years ago, Preston had walked in here wearing a $4,000 suit, ordered a black coffee, and charmed the quiet brunette in the corner. Tonight, he walked in dripping wet, his suit ruined, his hair matted against his forehead, smelling of dumpster juice and desperation. The barista, a young man with a nose ring and a beanie, looked up from the espresso machine. His nose wrinkled slightly. "Bathrooms for paying customers only, man." Preston flinched. The assumption that he was homeless stung more than the cold. "I'm meeting someone," he croaked, his voice raspy. "Preston." The voice came from the back corner, The same corner where they had met. Audrey was sitting there. She wasn't wearing the white power suit from the courtroom anymore. She was wearing jeans and a soft cashmere sweater. She looked normal. She looked like the Audrey he had married, the one he had grown bored of. But there was a calmness around her now, a terrifying stillness. On the table in front of her sat 2 cups of coffee. Preston walked over, his legs heavy. He pulled out the chair and sat down. He tried to muster a smile, but his face felt like cracked plaster. "You look terrible," Audrey said, taking a sip of her latte. "It's been a hard day," Preston managed to say. He reached for the coffee cup in front of him, his hands shaking. The warmth of the ceramic mug almost made him cry. "Audrey, listen. I know you're angry. You have every right to be. I was distracted. I lost sight of us." Audrey watched him over the rim of her cup. She didn't blink. "But this?" Preston gestured vaguely at his wet clothes, the window, the city outside. "Taking the company? Freezing the accounts? It's too much, baby. You've made your point. I've learned my lesson." He leaned in, dropping his voice to that low, persuasive timbre that had closed million-dollar deals. "Let's stop this. Give me access to the accounts. I'll fire Jessica. I'll make it up to you. We can be a power couple. With your family's connections and my business acumen, we could rule this city." Audrey set her cup down. The sound was soft, but final. "Your business acumen," she repeated, tasting the words. "Yes," Preston nodded eagerly. "I built Sterling Dynamics from the ground up. You know that. I took a small logistics firm and turned it into an empire. I know how to run it. You don't. You're a teacher, Audrey. You don't know the first thing about supply chains or unions or margins. You need me." Audrey sighed. She reached into her bag and pulled out a file folder. It wasn't a legal document this time. It was a financial ledger. "Open it," she said. Preston opened the folder. His eyes scanned the columns of numbers, dates, amounts, wire transfers. "What is this?" "That," Audrey said, "is a history of every major crisis Sterling Dynamics faced in the last 5 years. She pointed to the first entry. 2019, the trucking strike. You remember that? You told me you settled it by negotiating a brilliant deal with the union boss." "I did," Preston said defensively. "No, Preston. You screamed at the union rep and threatened to fire everyone. The strike was going to bankrupt you in a week. The ledger shows a $2 million anonymous donation to the union pension fund that smoothed things over. That came from my trust." She pointed to the next one, 2021, the Asian supply chain collapse. "You said you found a loophole in the shipping lanes. You didn't. You were insolvent. Orion Holdings bought your bad debt and recapitalized you. Orion Holdings is me." She flipped the page. "Every time you failed, Preston, I was there. Every time you thought you were a genius, it was me, quietly writing a check behind the scenes because I loved you, and I wanted you to feel proud of yourself. I wanted you to be the man you thought you were." Preston stared at the papers. The numbers blurred. His entire identity, the brilliant CEO, the shark, the self-made tycoon, was dissolving before his eyes. He hadn't won anything. He had been a child playing with toys that his wife bought for him. "Why?" he whispered. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't want to emasculate you," Audrey said, her voice tinged with sadness. "I thought if I supported you, eventually you'd grow into the role. But you didn't grow. You just got arrogant. You started believing your own myth. And then you started treating me like an accessory to a success that I paid for." She closed the folder. "I didn't take your company, Preston. I just stopped pretending it was yours." Preston slumped back in his chair. He felt hollowed out. So what now? You called me here to tell me I'm a fraud? No, Audrey said. I called you here to offer you a job. Preston's head snapped up. Hope, pathetic and resilient, flared again. A job? You mean as a consultant? CEO emeritus? Audrey shook her head. She pulled a single sheet of paper from her bag and slid it across the table. It was an employment contract. Position: Warehouse Associate, Level 1. Location: Sterling Dynamics Distribution Center. B. Gary, Indiana. Salary: $16.50. Hour: Preston stared at the paper. Is this a joke? No, Audrey said. You said you know how to run the business. I think it's time you actually learned how it works. You'll be loading trucks. You'll be clocking in at 4 a.m. You'll be peeing in a bottle because the bathroom breaks are too short, a policy you implemented, by the way. I will not, Preston spat, pushing the paper away. I am Preston Sterling. I do not load trucks. Then you starve, Audrey said simply. She stood up. Those are your options. You have no money, no credit, and thanks to the press release I just sent out, exposing your creative accounting, no one in this town will hire you to walk their dog. Take the job, Preston. Learn what it feels like to be the little guy. She placed a $10 bill on the table for the coffee. The offer expires at midnight. If you want it, show up at the warehouse tomorrow. Ask for the foreman, Mr. Henderson. He's looking forward to meeting you. She walked toward the door. Audrey! Preston shouted, causing the barista to jump. You can't leave me like this. I'm your husband. Audrey paused at the door. She looked back, silhouetted by the streetlights. No, Preston, she said. My husband died a long time ago. You're just a bad investment I finally wrote off. The bell above the door chimed. She was gone. We're closed, buddy. Beat it. The barista didn't even look up as he locked the door behind Preston. The bell jingled, a cheery sound that felt like a slap in the face. Preston Sterling stood on the wet sidewalk, shivering as the wind off Lake Michigan sliced through his soaked suit. Inside the coffee shop, the safety lights glowed warmly. Outside, Chicago was a cold, indifferent monster. Preston reached into his pocket, his fingers brushing the dead weight of his phone. No battery, no Uber, no digital wallet. He was a ghost in the city he used to own. Driven by a painful muscle memory, he began to walk toward the financial district. His Italian loafers, designed for boardrooms, slipped on the slick pavement. Within 10 blocks, his heels were blistered and bleeding. He stopped across the street from the Sterling Dynamics Tower. It rose into the night sky, a monolith of steel and arrogance. He looked up at the 40th floor. The lights were blazing. Audrey was up there. She was probably rewriting the corporate charter, perhaps laughing with Arthur Kingsman about the man who thought he was a king. A black town car pulled out of the garage. Preston instinctively stepped back into the shadows, pressing his spine against the rough brick wall. He held his breath, terrified that a former employee might spot him. The shame was heavier than the cold. He wasn't mourning the money. He was mourning the image. Without the suit, without the tower, he didn't know who he was. He kept moving, drifting down toward the river, into the lower levels of Wacker Drive, where the tourists never went. The air down here was thick with the smell of wood smoke, exhaust and stale urine. Hey, nice threads! Preston froze. 3 figures emerged from behind a concrete pillar. They looked hungry. The leader, a gaunt man with a jagged scar, flicked a switchblade open. I don't have money, Preston stammered, backing away. I didn't ask for money, the man sneered. I asked for the suit and the shoes. Strip. Preston didn't fight. He looked at the knife, then at the dark, swirling river nearby. He took off the jacket, the tie, the shirt. He stood shivering in his boxers, the humiliation burning hotter than the fire in the nearby barrel. The men tossed him a bundle of discarded clothes in exchange: grease-stained sweatpants 3 sizes too big, a torn flannel shirt, and canvas sneakers with holes in the toes. "Fair trade, Richie Rich," the man laughed. Preston ran. He scrambled up the embankment, sliding in the oversized shoes until his lungs burned. He collapsed onto a park bench near the Riverwalk, gasping for air. He was wearing rags. He was freezing. He was nobody. He curled into a ball, trying to preserve body heat. Sometime around 3:00 a.m., the squeak of wheels woke him. "Easy, son," a gravelly voice rasped. An old man stood over him, pushing a shopping cart filled with cans. He wore a coat patched with duct tape. He reached into the cart and tossed a foil-wrapped object to Preston. "Eat. You look like you're fading." It was half a turkey sandwich, stale, dry, and sweating cheese. Preston ate it in 3 bites, choking back tears. "Who are you?" Preston asked. "Used to be Doc," the old man said, staring at the skyline with cataract-clouded eyes. "Thoracic surgeon. Before the drink took the hands and the lawyers took the house." Preston stared at him. A surgeon, a man of godlike status, reduced to pushing a cart. "How do you survive?" Preston whispered. "You stop looking up," Doc said, gesturing to the skyscrapers. "Looking up just breaks your neck. You look forward. You find a task. You be useful. The concrete doesn't care who you used to be, kid." Doc pushed his cart away into the mist. "Good luck." Preston sat in the silence. Be useful. He reached into the pocket of the filthy sweatpants. His fingers brushed a piece of paper. The muggers hadn't taken it. They thought it was trash. He pulled it out. Warehouse associate. $16.50 an hour. He looked at the river. It would be so easy to slide in. To end the humiliation. But then he remembered Audrey's face in the coffee shop. She hadn't looked at him with hate. She had looked at him with pity. She expected him to die. She expected him to be too soft to survive. A spark ignited in his chest. A cold, hard flame of spite. He checked the time on a distant clock tower. 3:45 a.m. The shift started at 4 a.m. The warehouse was 3 miles away. Preston stood up. He tightened the drawstring of the sweatpants. He tied the laces of the canvas shoes until they choked his feet. He started to walk. Then, finding a rhythm in the pain, he started to jog. The warehouse was a cavernous maw of concrete and corrugated steel, vibrating with the roar of diesel engines and the screech of conveyor belts. It smelled of exhaust, cardboard dust, and the sour sweat of 100 men. At 3:59 a.m., Preston burst through the personnel door. He was gasping for air, wearing the grease-stained sweatpants and the oversized flannel shirt the homeless men had thrown at him. He looked like a junkie coming down from a bad high. A large man with a buzz cut and a clipboard blocked his path. This was Henderson, the foreman. He looked at Preston with unmasked disgust. "You the temp agency send over?" Henderson barked. "You look like garbage. You high?" "No," Preston wheezed, straightening his spine. "I'm hungry, and I'm ready to work." Henderson snorted. "Line 4. You're stacking pallets. Drop one, you're docked. Slow down the line, you're gone." The first hour was a descent into hell. The boxes weighed 50 pounds each. They came down the belt with relentless, mechanical indifference. Preston's soft, manicured hands that had only ever lifted fountain pens and crystal tumblers, blistered within 20 minutes. By the second hour, the blisters popped, leaving raw, bloody skin. By the third hour, he threw up in a trash can while the other workers laughed. "Look at the new guy," one shouted. "He won't last until lunch." But Preston didn't quit. He wiped his mouth with his dirty sleeve and went back to the line. He thought about Jessica stealing his money, He thought about the pity in Audrey's eyes. "I will not be a joke," he chanted, lifting another box. "I will not be a joke." He finished the shift. When the whistle blew, he collapsed on a stack of pallets. Henderson walked by and flicked a payslip onto his chest. "You didn't die," he grunted. "Come back tomorrow, or don't." Preston came back. He came back every day for 6 months. The transformation was brutal and absolute. The soft bloat of expensive scotch melted off his frame, replaced by lean, ropey muscle. The bloody hands calloused over into hard leather. He stopped sleeping on benches and rented a room in a boarding house that smelled of boiled cabbage. It was the size of his old walk-in closet, but he paid for it with his own sweat. But the real change happened 3 months in. During lunch, Preston sat on an overturned crate, listening to a worker named Diego complain about the pick path, the route they walked to grab items. "It makes no sense," Diego said. "We walk past the heavy stuff to get the light stuff, then backtrack. It adds 2 miles to the day." Preston grabbed a piece of cardboard and a Sharpie. He drew a diagram. "The algorithm prioritizes inventory density, not human motion," he said quietly. "Diego, if you stage the Zone A pallets near the dock at 4 a.m., before the trucks arrive, you cut travel time by 18%. They tried it. The team finished an hour early. Henderson was suspicious, then stunned. Efficiency numbers for Shift B skyrocketed. 6 months later, Preston was promoted to Shift Lead. He wore a clean uniform with his name embroidered on the pocket. Preston. Just Preston. He had dropped the sterling. Then came the inspection. A fleet of black SUVs pulled up to the loading dock. The ownership was touring the facility. Preston was on a forklift, moving a crate of engine parts when he saw the entourage. Suits, clipboards, and at the center, Audrey. She looked radiant, pointing at the racks with authority. She turned and saw the man in the forklift. She paused, slowly removing her sunglasses. Preston killed the engine. He climbed down. He didn't hide. He wiped his grease-stained hands on a rag and met her gaze. "Hello, Preston," she said. The silence on the dock was heavy. "Ms. Sinclair," he nodded. "Henderson tells me Shift B is the most efficient unit in the company," she said, stepping closer. "He says the new shift lead redesigned the logistics flow." "Common sense," Preston shrugged. "The algorithm didn't account for fatigue." Audrey searched his face. She saw the lines, the tan, the clear eyes. "I heard you stayed. I kept waiting for you to sue, or steal, or beg." "I thought about it," Preston admitted. "But I met a doctor under a bridge who told me to stop looking up and start being useful." Audrey smiled, reaching into her sleek portfolio. "I need a VP of logistics, Preston. The salary is $400,000. You'd have a driver. You'd have your life back." She held out a contract. It was the exit ramp. Redemption. Preston looked at the contract. Then he looked at Diego, who was watching him with respect. He looked at the warehouse, a machine he was now a vital part of. "No," Preston said. Audrey blinked. "No?" "I don't like who I am in the tower," Preston said. "I like who I am here. I sleep better. And besides, I have a date tonight with Sarah, the cashier from the diner. We're going bowling." He smiled, a genuine, easy smile. "I'm happy, Audrey. Keep your money." Audrey realized then that the punishment she designed to break him had actually saved him. She put the contract away. "I'm glad, Preston," she said softly. "Oh, one more thing." She handed him a small envelope. "The divorce is final today, but I wanted you to have this." Preston opened it. Inside was a check for $16.50. "Your first hour," she said, her eyes twinkling. "You earned it." Preston laughed, a loud, booming sound that echoed off the rafters. As Audrey walked away, he pocketed the check, climbed back into the forklift and shouted, "All right, break's over. Let's move." Preston Sterling was dead. Preston, the shift lead, had work to do. Wow, from a billionaire tyrant to a warehouse shift lead, and happier for it. Preston learned that you can't buy character. You have to build it when you have nothing left. Audrey didn't just take his money. She gave him the reality check that saved his life. Was Audrey too harsh, or was this exactly what Preston needed? And would you have turned down that VP job? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this story of redemption, please hit like and subscribe so you never miss the next one. Thanks for watching.